welcome to Modern Day Debate. My name is Carissa and I am your host for tonight. Really excited about tonight's debate. We are discussing All Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter. So really hyped for this one. So for the purpose of Modern Day Debate is to provide an equal and fair playing field for you to be able to present your positions on things and have those positions challenged. So if you enjoy debates, if you like watching these awesome speakers go up against each other, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can catch every single debate that comes out in the future. So definitely be sure to subscribe. Also, tonight we have some really amazing speakers with us. TJump, he has debated multiple times on the channel. He is a seasoned veteran of debating. And if you, and Brenton Lingle is honestly the same. He's debated a ton. So if you do like both of these speakers or either one, go ahead and subscribe to them. Their links are in the description box below. So definitely be sure to check them out. TJump, what would people be able to find at your link?
At my link, you can find James's OnlyFans. He has a specific link specifically at my website that you can personally find only there. It's great. Check it out. I also do the occasional debate with professors and philosophers and academics on specific topics. So yeah, check my YouTube channel out.
Awesome. And Brenton, how about you? What can people find at your link?
You can also find me on James's OnlyFans. No. Just Google my name, Brenton Lengle. My website is www.brentonlengle.com. My comic book, Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, is available for purchase through Scout Comics. We've been nominated for 2 Ringo Awards, and I am getting the printed comics from our last successful Kickstarter are being shipped to me from Florida right now. As soon as I get them, I will be signing them and sending them out to backers. And anybody who's interested will also soon have the opportunity to back issue number 3, which is really exciting. The series is really heating up. People really like it. So, I'm excited to continue to produce it.
Amazing. All right. So definitely be sure to check those out. How tonight's going to go is we're going to do our standard 10-minute openings. TJump is going to go ahead and lead us tonight with those. And then we're going to go into about an hour of open discussion, followed up by 30 minutes of question and answer. So if you do have a question, be sure to fire it into the old super chat. And that is a 100% guarantee that your question will be asked to these amazing speakers. So without further ado, TJump, if you want to go ahead with your opening, you are all set.
Yeah, so apparently I'm going to lead us. So I'm going to lead us in prayer. Let's all bow our heads and pray to the spaghetti monster. This goes well. So my position is all lives matter. I do not support Black Lives Matter. The problems I see with BLM is, one, it's founded on a lie. There is no disproportionate shooting of unarmed black people or shooting of black people by police. It's just factually incorrect. So it's founded on a lie. Second, it's not like the civil rights movement in a number of ways. There's several ways I'd like to focus on. And 3, the underlying motivation of systemic racism is not a significant factor holding back communities from succeeding in the United States. 4th is the political focus. Black Lives Matter is more focused on political goals rather than improving black lives. So all of my stats and a lot of my quotes are stolen from John McWhorter, Coleman Hughes, and Sam Harris, just so you can find all of this stuff on their channel if you're curious. So the number one thing, founded on a lie, Black Lives Matter has arisen as a social movement in response to police killings of unarmed African Americans. This is a myth that this occurs disproportionately to African Americans. There are about 1,000 people shot by police every year. 95% of those are armed. So about 50 people that are unarmed are shot by police. About 19 to 25 are black occasionally on average every year. All the cases that have been sensationalized in the media of unarmed African Americans shot by police have a white counterpart. Tamir Rice, who was a black boy of about 12, was brandishing a toy weapon. He was shot dead. The exact same thing happened to a boy named Daniel Shaver not long after, and Shaver was white. Sam DeVos was shot dead by police driving his car away from a cop. The exact same thing happened to, a little bit before that, to a white guy named Andrew Thomas. Alton Sterling was a black man who was reached into his waistband and reached for his wallet during an altercation with the cops, and the cops shot him dead. That was a grievous event. The same thing actually happened around the same time to a white guy named Dylan Noble. Alton Sterling made national headlines. None of us ever heard about Dylan Noble. George Zimmerman said some really nasty things about certain people and how they were always going around stealing things before he ended up killing Trayvon Martin. A policeman said the same sorts of things, including using the word effer before he killed a white teenager named Lauren Simpson. George Floyd was a particularly brutal death, where his white counterpart, Tony Timpa, was killed in 2016 by Dallas police officers who used a knee to pin him down to the ground for 12 minutes. In the video, you can hear Timpa whimpering and begging to be let go. After he lets out his final breath, the officer began cracking jokes about telling him to wake up for school. Criminal charges initially brought against them were later dropped. Are police corrupt, poorly trained, and make mistakes? Absolutely. Does this affect Black lives more than white? Absolutely not. The first thing that needs to happen for BLM to become a respectable organization is that they need to abandon this lie that Black people are disproportionately affected by police shootings. As soon as BLM is willing to admit that, we can move on to the other issues that are real and do disproportionately affect African Americans. If you want to argue that it's disproportional by the population instead of the crime rate, well, that's just a stupid argument. This is another example of an argument BLM needs to abandon because it's not respectable. The rate African Americans shot is exactly proportional to the crime rates. Population doesn't matter. If there are two states like Oklahoma and Texas, Oklahoma has 13% of the population of Texas. If Oklahoma commits 37% of the crime and 50% of the murders, Texas commits 67% of the violent crime. What percent of the police shootings would you expect to see in Oklahoma versus Texas? And clearly, it's not going to be based off the population rate. It's going to be based off of the interactions with police. The same thing should apply to race groups as well as the locations. It should not be expected that the amount of police shootings should be proportional to the population. It should be proportional to the interactions with police. Secondly, the BLM is not like the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was focused on actual issues that objectively did affect African Americans more, like voting rights, public accommodations, the desegregation of public facilities, desegregation of public education, the non-discrimination of federally assisted programs, equal employment opportunity, registration, voting statistics, intervention and removal of cases. There are lots and lots of things that the civil rights movement were objectively focused on, all things that did definitively affect African Americans more than white people. So they were a legitimate movement by this criteria I've outlined, whereas the police shootings is objectively not. The foundational flagship topic of BLM it's just false. It's a myth. Third, systemic racism is not a significant factor in holding back communities from succeeding in the US. The underlying narrative of Black Lives Matter is that systemic racism is preventing the Black community from succeeding, but this is just objectively not the case. All of the cases that we can think of systemic racism, like redlining, rejected loan applications, no home ownership given, police profiling, slavery, indentured servitude, not having voting rights, rejection to good schools, poverty, rejected job opportunities by name, not allowed to use restaurants and other facilities, laws passed by the government specifically targeting. All of these things happen to Italians, to the Irish, to Chinese, Japanese, Jews, Mormons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these groups were victims of the same kind of systemic racism, but they were never accounted for 50% of the murders or 30% of the violent crime, and became leaders in achievement and have some of the lowest crime rates. If you think that, well, they're not Black, so they didn't face the same kind, we can look at immigration from other African countries like the West Indies. Like if we compare US-born African Americans to African immigrants from the Jamaicas, Barbados, the Caribbean, these groups differ in many ways, but they both face the same kind of systemic racism based on their skin color and their names. So if systemic racism was a significant factor in stopping success, they would also experience it. But African Americans achieved much more than the Native Africans in America. So Thomas Sowell showed in the 70s that second generation Africans from the West Indies living in the same city were earning 70% more than US-based African Americans. The Columbia sociologist Van Tran has a great essay in which he shows the differences this is brought out. You find neighborhoods of Black Africans right next to neighborhoods of Black West Indians in New York, and they're equally segregated from white people. So it gets rid of the idea that modern segregation plays a big role. And because they are equally segregated, it gets around the policing issue because these populations are being policed at the exact same rate because they live in the exact same neighborhood. And the police can't tell the difference between second generation West Indians and American Black persons. So it gets around the level of systemic racism or whatever is in the pipeline because of like related to schools or whatever, or anything else, because they have the exact same systemic issues since they live in the exact same neighborhood and use all the exact same services. You can find wildly different outcomes when you look into the rates of high school graduation. The graduation rates are much higher for Black West Indians Rates of enrollment in college are much higher for Black West Indians. Rates of professional occupation are much higher. Rates of crime rate are lower for Black West Indians. So this suggests that the role of systemic racism, to whatever degree it exists, is minimal, and it doesn't really prevent people from succeeding. At this point, the whole narrative built around the idea that this is the primary obstacle facing Black people just doesn't seem to comport with reality, which, I mean, most Black people don't even agree with this idea that systemic racism is the primary cause. There are a number of polls to cite here, but there's the first one would be from Pew that states that when asked Black people without a college education, has your race held you back in life? 60% said no. Another Gallup poll asked, is bias the main issue facing you in jobs and housing? 60% again said no. The Harvard sociologist Ethan Foucault, the polling of the Black community, found that disconnected Black youth who aren't in schools and don't have jobs and the people in the lowest rung of society asked the same question. 70% said no. So what we're getting here is that the people who are purporting this narrative that systemic racism is the biggest or one of the biggest causes facing the Black community is just not represented by Black voices, or at least the majority of them. So one of the biggest problems here is that you're not allowed to bring up cultural differences. There are cultural factors that are important that differ between these two groups, the Black Americans versus Black immigrant West Indies. And the idea that every culture, subculture is identical and behavior patterns are inculcated, and whenever a disproportionality is not possible that culture accounts for some of that disparity is very silly. Like, it's complete nonsense. Of course, cultures are different. They're not peoples, and different groups put different emphasis on certain things. So some are like more interested on family, some are more interested in education, some more interested in sports or whatever. So even though we know systemic racism does exist in some instances and racism does exist in some instances, this is not the primary cause of the lack of success for Black communities. The primary causes being the differences we can see with the two groups I mentioned earlier. They don't live in single parent homes. They commit crimes at a far lower rate. They have far lower arrest rates, lower incarceration rate, lower sentencing rates, lower sentencing periods, and higher education rates, even though they all share the same color of the skin. Finally, my last one is that Black Lives Matter is actually focused more on politics than improvement and well-being. If BLM was serious about change, they would bring up all the cases of white people being killed in the same unjustified way as Black people by cops, which would bring more people to their cause and actually make a difference. I will conclude there.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. We'll move on to Brenton for his 10-minute opening.
Thank you. You want to know what this is really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Those are the words of John Ehrlichman, President Nixon's top aide on domestic affairs. You may wonder why I'm quoting him, being that the Nixon administration ended 46 years ago. However, as we're all learning, the cruel, capricious, and downright malicious actions of our government have serious repercussions on our society and endure long after the evil men who first carried them out are long gone. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, the United States today spends an estimated $51 billion annually on this same war on drugs, which is in reality a war on Black people and hippies, and there aren't hippies anymore. Things got worse under President Ronald Reagan, who massively expanded Nixon's war on Black people and shifted the focus on criminal punishment over treatment. This led to a massive increase in incarcerations fueled by the crack epidemic that arose in the early 1980s. Congress quickly established a series of mandatory minimum prison sentences for various drug offenses, a notable feature of which was the massive gap between the amounts of crack cocaine associated with black people and of powder cocaine associated with whites in sentencing. Possession of 5 grams of crack led to an automatic 5-year sentence, while it took a possession of 500 grams of powder cocaine to trigger the same sentence. It is important to note that there is little to no effective difference between crack and powder cocaine. They are the same drug and do the same thing. To this day, there is an unproven but still nonetheless strong suspicion among many in the Black community that crack was first introduced to them by the CIA, an accusation which is at least somewhat credible, as the CIA has been proven to have been involved in international trafficking and sale of cocaine during the same period. In short, we have motive, we have opportunity, and we have means. Whatever the cause, these policies led directly to the rise of private for-profit prison systems, which Reagan, as a true believer in neoliberal capitalism and the privatization of government services, was only too happy to fill at a guaranteed 90% occupancy rate. Things only got worse when a Democrat got into power. Under the Clinton crime bill of the 90s, incarceration rates soared, cheered on by the likes of Hillary Clinton, who famously referred to young black men as psychopathic super predators. Today, similar occupancy guarantees continue in virtually every state in the union. As the number of prisoners exploded, the black community in the United States soon found that nearly 1/3 of their entire male population would spend some of their lifetime in these new for-profit beds. When combined with the fact that whites are as likely, if not more likely, to commit drug crimes than people of color, the issue becomes very clear. And I can only echo the words of Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in an Era of Colorblindness, when I say the primary target of the penal system's control can be defined largely by race. And I might add, not just any race, but one very specific race, bringing about a state of affairs today that she describes as, quote, a racial caste system strikingly similar to the Jim Crow South. Americans, despite making up 4.4% of the world's population, have roughly 22% of the world's prisoners. That's more than were held in Stalin's gulags. And for all of our talk about China's creeping authoritarianism and lack of respect for human rights, we imprison our own people at nearly 6 times the rate of the People's Republic of China. And despite blacks making up only 13% of the population, they make up the largest chunk, 34% of our male prison population. Where they are, of course, put to work, earning literal pennies a day, staffing call centers and manufacturing thousands of consumer products, from stereo equipment to military flak jackets. If you see "Made in America" on a product, odds are that product was made by prisoners, and odds are that prisoner was black. Now you may say, but, Brent, they deserve it. They broke the law. Blacks commit the most crime. And if you have been affected, like so many have, including, unfortunately, Sam Harris, by literal neo-Nazi propaganda based on a complete inability to understand statistics, you might quote some version of 1350. They're 13% of the population, but they commit 50% of the violent crime. And if you are particularly ignorant of the scientific consensus on this issue, you might even say that when blacks are killed by law enforcement, they are killed in proper proportion to the violent crime they commit. But this is simply not the case. To quote Nature Journal, the most cited and respected scientific journal in the Western world, quote, black people fatally shot by police were twice as likely as white people to be unarmed. These findings align with many studies published since 2015 suggesting that racial biases do influence police shootings. And in a study conducted by economists at Texas A&M evaluating 200 million 9/11 calls, white officers dispatched to black neighborhoods fired their guns 5 times as often as black officers dispatched for similar calls to the same neighborhood. Now, you could say that this is not a race issue, this is a class issue, because of course, when you control for poverty, poor whites and poor blacks commit violent crime at roughly the same rate, which is of course true. And there is a 350% increase in the likelihood of police killings in areas that suffer from high poverty. According to the Bureau of Justice and Statistics, poor urban blacks have rates of violent crime similar to poor urban whites, and there is no significant change in the crime rate when you move from rural to urban, which of course makes sense because poor people live in a pressure cooker, and when you put people in a pressure cooker, they're going to act out. You can be mad about that, you can wag your finger and say that shouldn't be, but that's reality. People who do not feel represented by the system that governs them feel no need to follow the laws and customs of that system, nor should they. However, when controlling for poverty, class differences account for more than 100% of the difference between white and Latino police killing rates, meaning that after adjusting for socioeconomic differences, Latinos actually have a lower police killing rate than whites. On the other hand, class differences only account for 28% of the differences between black and white police killing rates. So we objectively cannot chalk the increased police killing rates up to poverty alone, nor can we chalk them up to an increased crime rate, because again, these rights in their proper context are roughly equal. Oftentimes, when people don't think very deeply about race, they imagine that race itself prompts the behavior. Or if they want to get away from that, they'll say culture. And that this is what is causing the state to act out, which is to say the state views people of color as inherently unruly because they truly are unruly. But this is simply not the case. In her book, Towards a Political Philosophy of Race, Dr. Falguni Sheth of Emory University puts forth the idea that race, as we currently understand and practice it, is a construct of sovereign power, which is to say those who are in charge in a given society are the ones who create race. These are the people whose property the state is primarily interested in protecting. And protecting from who? Well, from you, and me, and especially those populations that are perceived to be unruly. Now, you'll note that I've said perceived, and that's an important word, so make note of it. Populations that are perceived to be unruly are targeted by the state. The state cannot definitively know who is unruly and who is not until they act, just like the state cannot distinguish from someone who's white from someone who's black but looks white enough to pass. It's not about what you actually are, it's about what a cop or a judge thinks you are. So if sovereign power thinks that you are unruly, well, mister, you better watch out and stop being so unruly. So when you assign a behavior or a propensity to a behavior to a race or community, you are putting the cart before the horse. The reason the state views them as unruly is because it is extremely convenient to view this particular group as unruly because they look different. And because there are oftentimes political reasons to do this, as in Richard Nixon perceiving the entire black community as monolithic enemies to his institution. And since people who look different come from very far away or have been subject to intense institutional abuse, they tend to have less access to valuable property and tend to be underrepresented within the elite ruling class for whom the state deploys its violence. In short, this misperception becomes a vicious cycle. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes, in a word, racism. And it leads to moments like the one we are in now. Now, this is a disturbing thought. It is much more comforting to imagine that our social institutions are, on average, functional, that important decisions like who should be let into the country and who should live where and who should be paid what for their work and who should live and who should die are being made for good and sensible reasons. But again, you heard John Ehrlichman on the position of the Nixon administration. Obviously, America, humanity, and human culture is a work in progress. So what's the answer here? How do we solve this problem? How do we fix the society that from its very inception was, in part, purposefully designed by stupid, cruel, and downright evil men? Men like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, stretching all the way back to the foundation of this nation. A nation that I might remind you and everyone here was built on the purposeful extermination of one race and the enslavement of another. That's certainly something I asked myself after the police killing of Eric Garner prompted the very first Black Lives Matter march in NYC, which I attended. I asked it as I watched Bloomberg's stop and frisk harass more Black and Latino men in New York City than the total population of all Black and Latino men in New York City. I asked it as I listened to a recording of cops threaten to break a teenager's arm for, quote, being an effing mutt. And the F, I took that out for YouTube. The cop used the other version of that word. Just a short distance from the doorstep of my own Harlem apartment. And I'm asking it again now, as riots continue to sweep the nation. The first step towards recovery is to admit that you have a problem. We cannot afford to be cowardly, not personally and not intellectually. We must admit that society does indeed undervalue Black lives, and we must take steps to remedy that situation. No justice, no peace can also be read as no justice, no peace, as in KNOW, as in when true justice is brought about, then and only then will peace reign. And that is why I support Black Lives Matter and have put my body and freedom on the line for them more than once. And that is why you should too. Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Let's go ahead into the hour of open discussion.
All right, so I want to start on the 1530, 1350. So how exactly? Nope, facts. I like
no, it's
facts.
Not facts. Look,
is it factually correct or incorrect?
This is very simple. I'm going to give you another example of this.
You're kind of interrupting a little bit. So
yeah, I'm interrupting because you're spewing hate speech, and I'm not going to let you do that.
Your opinion isn't what important to me.
No, it's not the opinion. Look, dude, here's how this works. Okay?
Brenton, you got to let me finish my point, and then you can address
Fine, finish the point, and then I'll destroy it.
So again, it seems like the violent crime rate for African Americans is 37%. The amount of African Americans shot by police is 37%. And I want to know exactly why you think that's racist, and if you think we solved the racism, what do you think those numbers should be?
Okay, so first off, the 1350 thing. Saying 1350 with no context on it is as dumb as saying the average American has one breast and one testicle. Both are true statistical facts because you take the entire population of America, it's roughly 50% women, 50% men. Men have two testicles, no breasts. Women have two breasts, one testicle. Divide them by two, one breast and one testicle. This is why my statistics professor in college, one of the first things he told us was there are liars, there are damn liars, and there are statisticians. So you have to be very careful when you just go to these numbers and you don't actually account for these things. And as I said, when you account for poverty, for instance, these become roughly equivalent. So first off, the numbers that you're doing, you're just finding the number and you're stopping. You are not being intellectually curious. You're not saying, let's figure out what that is. And the reason why is you're just copying what Sam Harris has said on the topic. And Sam Harris is not qualified to weigh in on any of this. He's not a statistician. He is a neuroscientist, and he does not study. He does not study sociology. And again, we see the consensus as expressed by Nature Journal. He is unscientific in this.
Brenton, so I did actually clarify that, and I do actually talk to the statisticians. I actually have the papers on it. The papers do support what I said. The Nature Journal also supports
the papers, which went back to 2015, and again,
hold on, Brenton, just let him finish.
Okay. So no, all the ones that are all of the metadata that comes up to today, so 2020, supports this. And the data says that 37% of violent crime is committed by African Americans. That's the qualifying. So I didn't just go with 1350. That was just the introduction. I go with 3750 or 3713, something like that. I don't know which one it would be. So the actual data based on the qualified relevant statistics is that you would expect that based on the percentage of crime and percent of interactions with police, you would have more interactions with police and more police would do stupid things.
Yeah,
so,
you're assuming two things here. One, you're assuming that every time a police officer interacts with someone, they are interacting with them for a good reason.
I'm not assuming that.
Second of all,
assuming that.
Yeah. Second of all, you are not acknowledging that this is a self-perpetuating cycle. So
I don't care if it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So neither of those things are relevant to my point. My point is specifically if we just take states, like I gave the examples of Oklahoma and Texas. Oklahoma has 13% of the population of Texas. If it did 37% of the violent crime, what is the expected rate you would see police shootings? Now, I would say 37%. I would say if it was not racist, if there's no bias for states or whatever.
Wait a minute. Why would it be 37%? Just because you like those two numbers lining up together?
No, because of the amount of violent crime, you'd expect more policing to be in that area proportional to
sure, but 37 and 37 shouldn't necessarily be equivalent because one, not all violent crime is equivalent, and two, police officers aren't supposed to be judge, jury, and executioner running out there shooting people. The only time police officers are supposed to shoot someone is when they have no other choice. Now, they obviously
you're right. So I'm not saying the amount of police shootings are all I'm saying they're unjustified. So
but even the percentage
stupid. So yeah, there's a correlation. I'm not saying these are causally related. I'm saying there's a correlation. Like the amount of police who interact in these areas will have a proportional amount of police making mistakes. Like the police making mistakes will be the same percentage regardless of race if there's no racism. And so if you have a number of police incidents here and a second number of police incidents here, the number of police mistakes in those will be exactly proportional. So, well, if they're not racist, I'm saying they're just police make mistakes.
No, not even just with regard to mistakes. These are two completely separate, you've got two completely separate police departments and two completely separate police cultures from Texas to Oklahoma. So no, there's no reason why they would be exactly the same between Texas and Oklahoma in much the same way, because they're not exactly the same police officers and they're not responding in the same way. And again, I mean, if you look at my opening statement, we have
that doesn't help your case. So if you generalize over all the different police statements all over the country to try to make a single kind of a statistic, you would average them out. So that would totally be fine. So there's no problem with that. Saying that
it's fine for averaging out the statistic, but you can't say that this statistic should match this statistic.
Right. It's not like a necessity there. This is just a comparison. So we would expect, the argument is we would expect that the amount of crime is going to correlate to the amount of policing, and the amount of policing is going to correlate to more police stupid things. More policing equals more police mistakes. I mean, which part of that do you disagree with?
Well, it's not mistakes. Again, these policies were put in place specifically.
No, so I'm not talking about the policies. I'm just talking about police do stupid stuff like shooting unarmed people who are unjustified. That is purely just a mistake by police mostly. That's what I'm arguing. So
I mean, I think I think about 1/3 of them do it on purpose, but okay.
So why would that explain with why the white ones do it? Is there 1/3 of white ones that are also doing it on purpose or shooting white people on purpose? Why is it so proportional there?
Why is it so? There could be a million reasons why those two states might have it, including total coincidence. Because again, there's no.
Okay, so just to clarify, the states are made up. Like that's not actually a real thing. Yeah. That's just so okay.
Okay, but again, you just take it out of the realm of abstraction, put it into reality. There could be a million reasons why you might see something being proportional between one state and another.
So could one of the reasons be they're just not racist? They're just making mistakes at the same rate?
That would be highly unlikely in this culture. I mean, this is a nation built on the extermination of one race and the enslavement of another. This is a nation that had a president who literally started the war on drugs so that he could attack his political enemies, who he perceived to be largely black people.
And you think that's okay because of their past mistakes, which obviously I agree that Nixon's war on drugs was definitely racist, but that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with modern policing.
It's still going on. Those laws are still on the books that Nixon
Right.
started.
I mean, the modern police shootings don't have anything necessarily to do with the war on drugs. Like the
They
amount
absolutely
of people.
do. They have,
Again,
they absolutely do, because again, you have all of these. What?
Interrupting.
Oh, okay.
So again, the argument here I'm making
a lot
is
of
just
disgusting stuff, dude. I'm sorry. But continue.
you can't say it's disgusting just because of your own biases. You have to like demonstrate it. So I don't see any of this as disgusting. I'm just, from my perspective, it just looks like the facts. So don't
I
make
agree
judgments
from your
on it.
perspective. It just looks like the facts, but it's disgusting, dude. It's disgusting and stupid, and you shouldn't do it.
You'd have to demonstrate that.
I did demonstrate that.
Have not. So
With
again,
the
the
data
argument,
in my opening statement.
Brenton, interrupting.
Okay.
So again, the argument is that more police means more police doing stupid things. And so the proportional amount of people shot by police is going to be proportional to the amount of police there who do stupid things at an equal rate, not because of racism. And if that was the case, then you would see an equal amount of people being shot in every area relative to the number of police, which is exactly what we see.
That is not what we see. In fact, 30% of the shooting, only 30% of the shootings currently, like the fatal police shootings, are happening in the inner city. 60% are happening in the suburbs and in rural communities. So it is not proportionate across the areas. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that they have backed off on heavily policing inner cities as much, because, you know, you've got stuff like stop and frisk that was being put in and harassing these communities unjustly. And so you see less crime as like the freaking fist gets taken off of these people's throats, or as the boot gets taken off their throats.
Well, you see less crime permitted if there's no one arresting people, for sure. But again, so the location thing, the states was an analogy. We're talking about communities. As the community is policed more, you would see more violence, which could be in the suburbs and the cities. So most of them
but
don't
also
live in
the
the
presence
cities,
of the
they're in
cops
suburbs.
prompts the violence, and we literally have this from Frank Edgar's Rutgers University Department of Sociology. Aggressive policing over time can increase local levels of violence and contact with the police.
Yes, can increase, but it's not. The police aren't the ones killing 50% of black people in the country. That's not.
I'm sorry.
Case.
No, but the murders that are happening, you know, first off, the FBI crime statistics are taken from reports of crimes. Like there's a bunch of ways that they harvest that. But so every time someone says, "Oh yeah, this murder, some black guy did it," that gets counted in that total, even if they never caught it, because most crimes are not reported, and most crimes that are reported are not solved. On top of this, with the 13.
No, I don't think there's some prevalence of undisclosed murder cases that we just don't know about. That's not really a thing.
Missing persons, dude.
Yes, missing persons.
Missing persons that they got murdered, and then you don't find the body.
Can somehow, like, is there just a bunch of just white people who are going missing persons and just not reported as deaths or missing persons?
Yes, that literally happened to a kid I went to high school with.
No, I mean, like lots, like enough to offset the 50% of murders in the United States. You think?
I would say there would be enough to offset that, but we're not even just talking about that. That's just one example of a confounding factor and why you can't take these statistics at face value. Another reason why is that, for instance, black people, yes, they do supposedly commit crime at this higher rate and commit murder at this higher rate, but they're also 7 times more likely to be falsely convicted of murder. And if you look at the
that's still an extremely low number. So the number of people falsely convicted of murder is extremely low. So that isn't
that we know about, because most people who are falsely convicted of murder don't get off; they stay in prison with that. But the fact is that a black person compared to a white person, if both are convicted of murder and found to be guilty of murder, that black man is 7 times more likely to be innocent than the white man.
Okay,
so obviously the problem is in the justice system, and the fact that we are overcharging these people, over policing them, and we are putting them in prison for longer prison terms so that we can exploit them for their labor in for-profit prisons.
Okay, none of that actually addressed my points, any of the points that I raised. So again,
which point specifically do you want
to? First one is the 37%. So it seems like that the amount of police doing, like, interacting with people based on the amount of crime seems to be the explanation of why certain groups of people are disproportionately affected by population to the police being shot. Like the Nature journal you brought up, that was purely based on population statistics. The population, like, as I mentioned, 50 unarmed people are shot by police every year, approximately, like 20 of them are black, which is half of the number of white people that are shot or something like that. So they are literally 50% less or twice the white people or whatever, but that's the nature of statistics. But it's exactly proportional to the crime rate. So, I mean, I don't disagree with the stats. Obviously,
The issue being is that the crime rate itself this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You decide ahead of time that these communities are violent and need to be policed, either because they're recently escaped slaves, or they're recently released slaves, or Nixon thinks that they are his enemies. And so what they do is they say, okay, police the hell out of them. And then the police get into all these stops and the crime rate seems up and they say, well, wow, there's so much crime happening. What's happening here? Quick, throw more police at it. And then throw more police at it and throw more police at it. That's literally how stop and frisk worked in New York City.
Right. I agree with the origins of it. But today, if we just abolished America, started a new country, and decided to place police in specific locations, we would place the police where the crime was. So we do essentially the same thing.
Yeah, so you're just assuming that the crime is there. That is a circular argument.
No. We go based off the crime statistics that we actually know happens today. And we say, okay, so here's where the crime is. We're going to put the police there.
Yeah, so if we abolished America and started again, you would find, first off, that the statistic, like, you wouldn't have the same crime rates from one thing to the other, because you would be using different data points, and it would just be people reporting the crime. You wouldn't try to use like the statistics from before we abolished America to figure out where the crime was. Like, we're starting again.
I disagree with you on that point. So I think the stats are relatively accurate. Most academics think the stats are pretty accurate. They're not perfect, granted. They're pretty accurate. They're very reliable stats to use. Most of the studies use them.
Again, I highly disagree. But even if they are accurate stats, they don't actually tell us anything, because again, like as I pointed out, the issue here is not race, it's poverty. And of course the police killings go up when it's 350%. You're 350% more likely to be killed by police if you're poor than if you're not.
Right. And then there's more poor white people than black people. So they're also disproportionately affected, which is why it's the 60 or whatever, the 37% of victims are black and the majority of them are still white, because white people also have poor communities. So yeah, but I'm taking that into account.
Yeah, but the killing, again, this is not, so with regards to killing people, like whether they are white or black, and you seem to think that Black Lives Matter should spend its time attacking police in general, as opposed to bringing attention to one specific problem with police. Is that correct?
Definitely. I mean, the fact that they claim it disproportionately affects black people, or many of them do.
I mean, it does. 30%, like both policing and police killing, 30% of all black men will spend some amount of time in jail.
Well, I'm just talking about shootings here, only the shootings. So just talking about the shootings, it does not. It's exactly proportional to the crime rate.
It is not exactly proportional, because again, they make up a much smaller percentage of the population, and they are explicitly targeted for harsher sentencing and worse policing by the powers that be. This happens right now.
So go back to my analogy, Texas, Oklahoma. If Oklahoma has 13% of the population of Texas, commits 37% of the violent crime, what would you expect the police shooting difference to be between the two states?
Your question doesn't make any sense.
Sure it does. Anybody you ask in the audience is going to have a pretty obvious answer.
They may have an answer for it, but that's because they don't understand the statistics and how this actually works. What's happening is that you're trying to take this discussion into a realm of abstraction where there is no history, there is no implementation, and you're just trying to say because one number is bigger than the other, therefore we should do this.
I'm granting the history. I understand the racist history that was implemented, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, looking at the present data, there is a certain amount of crime here, which is significantly more than the crime here. And I grant the stats are pretty reliable, like the consensus does. And I say, if that's the case, there should probably be more police here. Like, we don't know. We can just ignore.
I mean, I'm going to disagree. I think in certain areas, even if there is more crime there might be less police, because again, more policing and over policing can cause more crime. Well,
it's definitely possible there's more crime and just no police there. That's definitely a possibility, but we're going to assume that.
No. I'm saying more police can cause more crime, as in police. You increase the number of police and you increase the number of stops and arrests.
Right.
What's
and then
going to happen is you make more criminals. You literally make more of them.
Yes, I understand that. Yeah. So again, that's not part of the argument here. We're just saying, if there is more crime, we know there is more crime here. We're just imagining America's abolished, so all the history's gone.
Okay, so suddenly we have perfect knowledge of where the crime is.
Sure.
Like we're God. So we have perfect knowledge of that. Okay.
Within like a 1,000-mile radius, yes. So we can say within a 1,000-mile radius, there is more crime within this bubble than this bubble. And we want to put police in certain locations. We'd probably put more police in the area with the more crime And if we have more
Potentially,
police in
it
that
would depend
area,
on whatever was causing that crime. If the presence of more police is what's causing more crime, obviously you don't want to put more police in there. And just the same way as how do we solve this house on fire problem? I know, more fire. Like if you take people, for
no.
instance,
I'll disagree with that for a minute. So the monopolization of state violence is one of the best benefits to society we've ever had as a human race.
I would love to have an argument with you about the state, and like that is my jam, but I'm not going to do that right now because that's completely off topic. It's extremely disrespectful to the people who are killed by police.
No. So I'm bringing up specifically your point where you said you wouldn't send more police. Yet, given how we know economies work, we would definitely send more police. The monopolization of state violence
could if we were stupid and weren't actually looking at the problem and the actual causes of the crime. Yes, someone who's stupid and doesn't understand it would say, oh, there's more crime, send more police. But that is not how this thing actually works, because again, over-policing can cause more crime.
Right. So, I'm not saying more, I'm saying proportional. We'd send proportional police to the areas, like we'd send more police to areas with more crime.
Okay. So even then, you don't necessarily want more police there, because when you have the police there, they get into arrests. And when they get into arrests, those arrests escalate for a number of reasons. So someone could, and there's a great example of this. It happened to a woman. She was in, I think, Baltimore, was it, or DC, where she was stopped by the police for a traffic violation. And she had unfortunately listened to the sovereign citizens movement, which was really stupid. And what she wound up doing was believing that the police officer had no right to stop her, and that the court had no right to pass that speeding ticket on her. And so she did not show up to her court date. As this whole process continued, this eventually constituted a SWAT team showing up at her door and killing her in front of her family. So that was a crime. Like, I think it was like she had like a stoplight out on the back of her car or something. I don't remember the exact details of this, but that was a crime that in no way would justify that amount of force. But because of each step, things escalating from the state, eventually you get to a point where we have a total tragedy. So
but none of that had to do
it
with
is
the
not a
number
good
of
idea
police.
to necessarily to put more
to do with the number of police. It's not like the more police you have, therefore they're going to go in with a SWAT team every time. That's not how it works.
No,
so,
but if you have more police in an area, they're going to make more stops. And if they make more stops, there's going to be more escalation. And if there's more escalation, you even admitted it, there's more mistakes.
Right.
So again, this idea of we should
do you
send
think we should
more
have
police,
less police in an area with more crime?
Depending upon the actual reasons that crime is happening in that area, less police may be the key to having less crime. A good example, again, you've got the Black community with 30% of their male population is put in prison. Okay. Once you are convicted of a felony, it's very, very hard to get another job. Also, they're put in prison for longer sentences, and the longer you're in prison.
So should we just not charge people with felonies anymore because they committed a crime?
The issue is that small mistakes that someone can make as a child, if those mistakes are like hammered on really hard by the state, what happens is they create a career criminal. Because
right, but
again,
that's not a number of cops issue. That's a bad policies issue. The number of cops there isn't the issue.
The number of cops there can be one of the many bad policies that drive this.
No, the number of cops is perfectly reasonable based on the number of crime.
Why?
Because if you have more crime, it makes sense to put more police there because the monopoly on violence by the state is really good.
Only if you don't understand the causes of crime. Only if you haven't studied criminology or statistics or sociology. That's just like the first. That's like baby's first policing.
No. Economics completely disagrees with you. As I keep mentioning this Steven Pinker quote of Leviathan, who's a brilliant academic.
No, he's an idiot that the freaking ruling class loves to trot out because he freaking kisses their ass.
No. But that's, we can talk about Steven Pinker later.
Yeah, that would be another good debate, by the way.
So the monopoly of violence by the state has been really, really good for societies all over the world. That's a good
highly disagree. I think it's one of the worst things ever happened, but that's another debate.
Okay, so I'll just say that's my position. That's the position of most academics. And
most most academics are statists because they live in a statist society. It'd be like if we lived in a society that was run by bird worshippers. Most academics would say, "Hey, it's great, worship some birds."
Brenton, interrupting. So my point is that by the consensus of the experts, more police where more crime is usually a good idea because we want to maintain that state monopoly of violence as much as possible. Now,
What
I don't
experts
think
in particular are you citing here?
I'd have
let him finish his point.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
I'd have to pull up the actual data here because this is not really a controversial point. It's just
Sure.
the
Can you send the
Leviathan.
data to me after the thing? Because I'd like to go over this and the 4 studies because I don't think I've ever heard them before.
Sure. Do you know Leviathan? Who was the famous guy who wrote that?
Thomas Hobbes.
Yes, Thomas Hobbes. Big school in academics about in economics about following Hobbes and why Hobbes Leviathan actually worked in many cases. But so the fact that we want to have police to maintain an area, if you get rid of police, what you usually get based on this model is more crime. If you get rid of police, you get more crime because people can't trust in certain things. Like if you can't trust in the government, you need reciprocity, like manual things. There's all kinds of things that go through in that argument.
So this is not true. At the times when we have had police strikes in New York and slowdowns,
we can have a different debate on that one. But just
well, you cited a fact that's not true.
Well, this is just an introduction based on. So this is one of my facts. So I believe this is the case, and if this is the case, then it makes sense that we should put more police in where there's more crime because we want to maintain that police monopoly on violence as much as possible. So based on this theory, if there's more crime in one area, we would put more police there and we would expect more police mistakes there.
Okay.
And so if that is the case, it makes sense to think that if 37% of the crime is in Oklahoma, even though it's only 13% of the population, and we put more police there, they're obviously going to be the victims of more police stupid. And that isn't a race issue. It's not like we hate Oklahoma. It's just that's where the crime is. And that's
okay, but Richard Nixon specifically said it was a race issue.
The war on drugs. What did I say about Nixon? I didn't say anything about Nixon.
My point is that the people that are the people that are setting policies that are carried out in the present day cause police to disproportionately attack certain communities. And they are intentional oftentimes. Sometimes they are unintentional as well.
So again, I'm just looking at the present data. Imagine America was abolished, all history is gone. We would put the police where the crime is based on this model of economics and how police work. And so if there was more crime in this area, regardless of the history, regardless of what caused it, we would still put more police in that area and then try to solve the political issues causing it, but we'd still have more police there. And so it would make a lot of sense that the more police equals more police shootings.
Okay, I do agree that more police equals more police shootings, but where are you going with that fact? Are you saying more police equals more police shootings, therefore those more police shootings are justified and are fine and don't change anything?
They're not by racism. The cause isn't racism, the cause is the more police.
I mean, it depends on what you define as racism. If you define them as personal racism, there's plenty of times that police have killed for personal racist reasons. And police departments, particularly in the South, because they were founded and grew directly out of slave catching patrols, follow through with explicitly racist policies. A good example of this would be the Ferguson police, which were found by Trump's own DOJ to have used police dogs exclusively to intimidate and punish African Americans. They didn't use the dogs on anyone else, just African Americans. And the DOJ found not only that, but they did not use them when they needed to them. They used them specifically to punish people and to frighten them and terrorize them in much the same way that the slave patrols that they directly grew out of did. So this is a culture from the inception of the police to present day. We have this direct racist culture.
So again, I want to focus just on shootings here, not go into every single detail of every single crime committed by police. And yes, there are obviously racist police who shoot people, but is that like a systemic issue? Is there like a prevalence of police shooting black people? No.
Yes, it is a systemic issue, again, because if you've got a police department that thinks it's okay to sick dogs on black people just because they got uppity, like that's really messed up. And you don't think that attitude won't also contribute to shootings and then ruling that they themselves are justified in those shootings? You think that culture
exactly
won't have any
the question we're trying to
on
answer. Why is the proportion of shootings exactly the same as the proportion of violent crime? Why is it?
Because they over-police black people.
They over-police the exact proportion to the violent crime.
Look, you've got an issue here where the judge and the advocate are the same people. So when they decide where the violent crime is, it comes from 2 sources. It comes from filed police reports, and it comes from people self-reporting, hey, a crime just happened to me.
And dead body counts and coroner counts and all kinds of things. They don't just report it. But it's not just a report of a dead body. You have to have a dead body.
Yeah, but again, so first of all, they're not confirming that with regard to it. They're just like filling out the paperwork, and people are going by what's on the paperwork.
I don't think that's the case.
That is definitely the case. Now, there's also coroner's reports and stuff as well, and we can look into that. But that is not how the FBI collects their crime statistics. They're not pulling coroner's reports. Now, there is like a hate crime database, and there are some other places where they do pull that. But again, you've got an issue where the judge and the advocate are the same people. So they're deciding there's a problem. They're sending more police there. Oh, what? Oh, wow, the crime rate went up. The shootings went up. Quick, throw more police on it. And you've got a vicious cycle. And sometimes it's explicitly racist, sometimes it's not.
The vicious cycle thing, again, I agree with, but again, none of that has anything to do with my point. So forget everything about history. We're just like, if we just went to an alien planet and we say, there is this amount of crime in this location, there is this amount of crime in this location, we'd expect more cops to be in this location. So
I inherently reject this framing because, again, when Black Lives Matter is talking about systemic racism, they're grappling with the history of systemic racism. What you're essentially saying when you take it out of this and put it into this abstract realm where we go to another planet and we suddenly have no history is you've essentially said, no systemic racism. Let's imagine this problem if there were no systemic racism. So the problem itself is systemic racism.
The way thought experiments works is you try and isolate variables so that you don't include the other variables.
Certainly, but you're keeping out one of the most important variables.
Is this one variable an example of systemic racism? That's the question. So if you see this other variable in a different instance without the presumed systemic racism we already know is there from the history, would it still be seen as a racist fact, or would it not be? Would it make perfect sense as a non-racist fact? And that seems to be the case. If we take it out of the context of history, it seems to look exactly like a non-racist fact. It looks exactly like the facts we would expect to see if it was not racist.
Yeah. Let me engage with you on this because I think there's something I can actually point out here. So a non-racist fact versus a racist fact, essentially what you've got here. And you talked earlier about why people aren't getting all up in arms in the way that Black Lives Matter is with the police killings of white people. Well, again, it's because police killings of white people are not racially motivated. They're I mean, maybe like one or two, but overall, like there are no systemic reasons why judges would sentence white people more harshly, or why a cop would think that a white person, because they are white, is more likely to commit a crime. The problem is that we do have those attitudes internalized both in individual people's minds and also like in the system itself. So yeah, you could see
even if we grant that most of the cases where police shootings are unarmed are not because of racism. They're specifically not because of racism. Most of the ones that have been promoted by Black Lives Matter have actually been ruled self-defense in many cases. Like these are not racist issues, and there's definitely people.
The police investigated themselves and decided it's self-defense.
Well, the FBI investigated.
Yeah, the state investigated itself and decided it's self-defense. Like again, like we've got.
But again, the same thing happens to white people. Like literally, I went through every single example. Said this exact same thing happened to a white guy. Wait, why is it somehow racist in the first case but not the second case when the exact same thing is happening?
Because, well, first off, in a nation of what, 300 plus million people, 320, you will always be able to find a counterexample of the exact same thing happening to someone else just by the law of averages alone.
There's only 1,000 police shootings every year, so that logic doesn't quite hold.
Well, no, it does, because again, 1,000 police shootings per year, and what are we, like 69-70% white?
Sure, but again, the unarmed ones are 50.
by the sheer 50. Law of averages, you would be able to find
50 are unarmed. So 50, that's not like law of averages kind of numbers. Yeah,
look, you can always find like the alternative. The issue is that those alternatives do not take place within a systematic systematic system of racial hierarchy. So
what I don't even grant that is such a thing. Like I see it as happening in the exact same system. The exact same crime happens in the exact same system, and all the system is
totally different if you're black than if you're white. It seems on its surface to be the same system, but it is not.
It wasn't the same for Tony Timpa, who had his back crushed by a cop on his neck, which was the exact same as George Floyd. There wasn't like a difference. Oh, well, but it's fine because I'm not in the system of systemic racism.
No,
I'm just
look, if there were people who wanted to take issue with that, and I, for one, and the anarchist movement do take serious issue with police killings of anybody, because again, like the police is not nearly the protective institution that people think it is, and we can have a debate about that sometime if you want to. But the fact is that, one, for that narrative to come up, that would need to be a general criticism of the police. And that is not a conversation that the country is ready to have with regards to the Overton window. It is unthinkable for most people that we could question the police.
Well, I totally disagree with that, because most people are actually in agreement with that sentiment from Black Lives Matter. And even on the Republican side, most people on the polls show they are actually in agreement.
Yeah, but they say, but it's like with Joe Biden, where they say, oh, it's really bad, but it's a few bad apples. They agree that there's a problem.
Republicans say that. That's not.
Joe Biden said that in the no. Joe Biden said that in the debate against Donald Trump last night.
Joe Biden. Yeah. No one likes Joe Biden. Not even.
I agree. No one likes Joe Biden, and no one likes Donald Trump.
Most Democrats do agree that the police are overly violent. They definitely that's a pretty common feature of Democrats on all.
I would have to see the data on that, because I know plenty of Democrats that are bootlickers, and freak out whenever I systematically say, well, maybe we shouldn't have police at all in the way that we have them.
I mean, I disagree with that too, but I think
I know. See, you're a bootlicker.
But most of them agree police are still too violent, and we should do something about it. Definitely.
Yeah,
they're terribly poorly trained. Everyone agrees with that. They have 6 months of training is not enough to be a police officer. They probably
I'm going to agree with you on that, but I think it is really dangerous and wrong-headed for you to say these Black people who are concerned about a problem that specifically affects their community and are taking steps to deal with it are wrong for caring about their community and taking steps to deal with it.
Well, the only part I'm disagreeing with in that statement is that disproportionately affects their community. That's the part I'm disagreeing with.
It does, again, because law enforcement targets them more often than it targets us. Let me give you an example. So when I was living in my old apartment in Harlem, not the second one in Harlem, but I would have to walk from my apartment down to the subway and take the subway down into the East Village to bring the props for my local production of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. Now, I'm carrying guns that have been painted to look like guns, which is illegal. It is explicitly illegal in New York to paint a toy gun to look like a real gun. I'm carrying swords, and I'm looking like a sketchy, rudderless hippie, because look at me. Not once was I stopped by the police. Not once was I even questioned. And I looked sketchy, and I was loaded down with all of this stuff, and I was literally breaking the law. They left me alone. Time and time again. Meanwhile, you got this kid, and I want everybody to Google this after the debate. Look up hunted and hated stop and frisk, and you'll find this. It's on an article by The Nation, and it's the police officers stopping a 14-year-old Black kid in my neighborhood near where I lived and threatening to break his arm. They made fun of his father for only being a traffic cop, and they continued to treat this kid like absolute garbage. And this happens. You see, there are police officers in there talking about how, for instance, this culture comes from their captains down, where they're coming out and saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to violate some rights today. So they do it on purpose, and they do it to Black people more than they do it to white people. Now, if you want to say...
Wait, where are you getting... That's the part I'm disagreeing with. Why do you think they're doing this more to white people, especially in the case of shootings? That just doesn't seem to be the case.
Again, it's because these laws and their implementation of these laws specifically targets the Black community. It specifically looks to lock up as many Black men as they can to fill these for-profit private prisons.
Which part of that story had anything to do with private prisons or locking up Black people?
All of it has to do with it. They get the orders from the top down. So if Richard Nixon sets up racist policy that seems fair on its surface, but specifically targets a community, and then that policy is improved upon by Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and pretty much
everyone. How does this connect
who's...
with your story? Like you said, there's these police guys wanted to break this kid's arm because he was Black or whatever. Yeah, what does that have anything to do with Ronald Reagan?
It has everything to do with Ronald Reagan, because again, what's happening is that at the top of the hierarchy, racist policies are created and sent down through the chain. And these are picked up both culturally and implicitly and also explicitly in terms of policies that affect specific communities. So, for instance, with regard to stop and frisk, you had captains specifically saying, go out and stop as many like Black and Latino men as you can find, which is how they got those ridiculous statistics where they stop and frisked more Black and Latino men than there were the entire population of Black and Latino men in New York City.
Why did they do that?
Because of the idea of like broken windows policing, because they're just looking at statistics like you are. And in a lot of ways.
So it wasn't based on specifically racism. They're actually just looking at statistics. They have more crime here. We should
they may be, well, they may be based on conscious racism. They may be based on unconscious racism. They may be lying and just saying that what they're doing is they're looking at statistics. Bloomberg famously said he's just looking at statistics. I think he's racist and lying. But the fact is that
I like to go with Hellman's razor. Don't attribute to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity. So just I don't assume unconscious racism is a thing. I don't really accept that. So
wait,
just going with
whoa, you don't think unconscious racism is a thing?
For the purposes of the debate, no. Like when I'm talking about racism, I'm only talking about like I deliberately have this intent to be racist to Black people. So that would not qualify. This unconscious racist bias would not qualify as what I'm referring to as racism.
Okay, so then you are defining racism differently than how Black Lives Matter defines racism.
I'm sure I am.
Yeah.
So I define it more like the legal kind.
Which then means that what you've essentially done is you've created a straw man.
What?
You have a different definition of racism than Black Lives Matter has of racism. So then they say
my critique of Black Lives Matter isn't their definition of racism. My critique of Black Lives Matter is that their claim that Black people are shot more than white people is more.
No, again, it's true because they are shot at a disproportionate rate. That is a fact.
That's the disagreement is that when you compare it statistically to the population rather than the crime rate, that's dumb. That's the problem.
Yeah, but also when you compare it, you want to compare it to the population because clearly the population is being targeted.
Well, like, you would never compare it to the population. Like in any other example, you say, here's the more crime rate. You wouldn't say, oh, but there's less population, therefore.
You're assuming that the crime rate is justified, that these are actual crimes that Black people are actually committing for no good reason.
I don't think you could ever commit a violent crime for good reason other than self-defense. So yes, I think that's the case. I definitely think all of the violent crime.
What do you define as a violent crime?
The same as the FBI statistics. So like all like certain kinds of violent burglary, assault, rape, murder.
Okay. So for instance, let's say this, just, I get to do the abstract thought experiment now. Let's say, my wife is dying of a preventative disease. There is one guy in that town with the cure. This is the only cure that I can get to her in time to save her life. I do everything that I can.
That's self-defense.
Yeah, and wait, that's self-defense. I'm
not like if you break into their house and steal their medicine.
Well, I was going to say kick his ass and take it, but yeah.
I'd still qualify that as self-defense. So yes.
Okay, but that's not what the Justice Department they wouldn't see that as self-defense.
Actually, I think they have in several cases. Like that's actually a pretty well-known example in philosophy. I can't do that off the top of my head. Definitely. Okay.
I'll have to see that, but I'm 100% certain that the Justice Department does
definitely not something that's like a common occurrence. That's not like. That's not
it's not a common occurrence, but the fact is that crime can happen for a variety of reasons, and you can't just say that all violent crime is wrong all the time. Like
I mean, like I said, in self-defense, it's totally fine. Like I definitely
but it can be judged as self-defense or not self-defense. I mean, a great example is like Kenosha, which is obviously not self-defense, but a bunch of idiots think it's self-defense.
What's Kenosha?
I'm talking Kyle Rittenhouse.
Oh, gotcha. So I would say that the vast majority of shootings of African Americans through gang violence and preemptive strikes are not self-defense. I'd say that the vast majority of reckless endangerment and drunk driving not self-defense.
Let me ask you something. Why do you think they're in gangs?
Fatherless homes, probably.
And why do you think they have fatherless homes? Does it perhaps have to do with the fact that 30% of African Americans, and 30% are locked up because of the policies of the Nixon administration and the Reagan administration? So again, we have a vicious cycle.
Well, that's not self-defense. So the fact that your father is in prison doesn't mean
no. I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about self-defense here. I'm talking about
justifiable violent crime. So that's the claim, is that the fact that your father is in prison is not a justifiable justification for violent crime.
I'm not justifying the crime here. I'm pointing out what you seem to be missing. Again,
wasn't that what we were talking about? It's like, what is a justified violent crime? I'm saying that these violent crimes are not justified, like the vast majority of them. And so it is justified that the police are more police in those areas because they are not justified.
Okay, so first off, there's been like a number of conflations here, and we've jumped to like pretty far off where we had started, and maybe I contributed to that, so I apologize on it. You cannot say that the crime rate that is disproportionately coming from the Black community actually justifies the response by the police of shooting and killing them. You can't say.
Right. I mean, we're talking about unjustified shootings here, so I totally agree with you there.
Yeah, but no, even when it is ruled justified, it's not
right.
necessarily justified. I mean, they ruled the people that killed Breonna Taylor as justified.
I agree with
and
you.
They were definitely unjustified.
I don't think shooting unarmed people is ever justified. I don't think that's ever justified, unless they kill like a bat or something.
So then why are you cleaving so hard to these statistics and numbers?
The claim that these statistics are an example of racism is the part I'm disagreeing with. Like, I definitely don't think
the statistics themselves are not an example of racism, but the interpretation of them is often racist because of the way that they exist. So say what?
What? I asked what question mark?
The interpretation of them is often racist. So you go up to someone with no knowledge of sociology, criminology, or statistics, and you say, hey, do you know that Black people are 13% of the population, but they commit 50% of the murders? Now, what do you think the average person with no knowledge of any of this
racism, they generalize that race is just inherently more violent.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they're going to say. And that's why literal white nationalists push it. And sadly, people like Sam Harris pick it up.
But I didn't say any part of that. So my mind is specifically related to the crime rate. So if this percent of the
crime
people,
rate, okay, the crime rate, it's the same thing.
How?
What do you mean how?
Because I see it as specifically, it makes perfect sense that if you have more crime, you have more police, you have more police shootings. None of that is racist. That's perfectly logical. Okay. Because if you just say the fact that they're 13% of the population, 50% of the murder, clearly that like implies some kind of racist connection. If you say this has a higher rate of crime and there's more police in that community, that doesn't imply racism.
Yeah. Okay. So let me explain how what you might be missing. I'll give you an example that leads to this was one that was argued with regard to Citizens United, talking about how the law is fair, essentially, and everyone has the same rights.
Which one is Citizens United?
Yeah, so Citizens United was the ruling that you could give as unlimited amount of money to the political candidate of your choice because money is free speech. So they said that this is completely fair because the billionaire has the same freedom that the hobo under the bridge has. They both can give unlimited amounts of their money to the political candidate of their choice. So on like close inspection, if you don't understand what a billionaire is, and you don't understand, what it is to be homeless, you can say, oh, this is the law being applied equally across the board. In much the same way, when you don't understand the situation between the Black community and crime, you think, oh, these statistics are just equal across the board, and they're being shot at a rate that they should be shot at, which, first off, not a single one of them should ever be shot. The only time that police should ever shoot is if they have literally no other option, and we know that that's not what they do. So you're sitting there saying that because the Black community is seen to be this criminal, what's happening is that they are being shot at even though way more Black people per capita are dying than white people, it's okay. And it's not okay, dude.
No, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying it's not racism. So that's not saying.
I mean, it is racism. It is systemic racism in the sense that the system itself was built to incentivize them to have more interactions with police, so that they could be put in jail more often, and that they could be put to work. That's the whole premise of the new Jim Crow.
Okay, the past thing that caused the more crime.
It's not past, it's still happening.
The thing that caused the more crime is past, by definition, caused, past tense. So the thing that caused the increase in crime is racist. But the fact that they do increase more crime isn't racist, it's just a fact. And so the fact that they do increase more crimes or do more crimes means we should probably put more police there based on the logic of the whole economic system that we use.
Sure, but again,
so that part's not racist
not a good
either.
idea necessarily, because
sure, but that's a different debate. So, but the fact that we should put more police there is, given the current system, not racist either, because it's not based off of all the past history. It's just based off of the non-racist fact they do factually commit more crime.
I mean, again, a non-racist person can still act in racist ways. When you are acting as a police officer and you are enforcing laws set by racists and laws that are intent on jailing a specific population, whether you in your heart are a racist or not, it doesn't matter. So like we can play kind of a Mott and Bailey game where, you know, we jump back and forth between definitions of racism because the word has many different definitions. But I don't think that's, at the end of the day, that's not going to solve the problem that, you know, we've got 30% of this population locked up. And when they get locked up, they can't get jobs. And when they can't get jobs, they do more crime. And oh my, I've gone cross-eyed.
You're going to say something?
I was actually going to jump in and say, let's have this point be the last point, and then we can jump into question and answer. Either we can do that now, since Brenton was the one who was supposed to wrap up, or if you guys want, if you have something to say, TJump, we can.
Well, I mean, I did want to ask clarification. What do you mean by Moat and Bailey? Because Moat and Bailey is when you present a point that's easy to accept and a point that's hard to accept, and then use the easy to accept to try and indicate that the hard one. But I don't see either of mine as being a hard point to accept. Which one is the hard point?
The hard point to the easy point to accept is that is like racism is individuals acting with hatred in their heart based upon race. The harder point so I guess it's kind of a reverse Mott and Bailey. The harder point to accept is that there are non-human systems that have been set up in such a way that it benefits some races and hurts other races for bad reasons.
So wouldn't that be your Mott and Bailey? Because that wasn't the point.
It would be bad. No, well, again, like when the Black Lives Matter is specifically talking about the police killings of African Americans, it is an institutional critique that they're making. They're not saying Black people are shooting African Americans because they personally hate African Americans. They're saying Black people are shooting African Americans at a disproportionate rate because the system has been set up to incentivize them to do that. And so if you object to it based upon the fact that you don't personally think these officers, you think they're just following their jobs and they're nice, lawful, neutral, ideal officers, which I don't think is the case, but let's even say that it would be, it doesn't actually address the criticism that Black Lives Matter is doing. You're arguing with a racism that isn't relevant to the conversation at hand.
Right, I understand what you're saying. And in that context, the point I would make is that it's not racist to police equivalent to the crime rate. So again, if we just forgot America existed and made a new country, we would still have the exact same amount of policing in that location.
Okay. So we're going in circles on that, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to bring up here. So the thing that you brought up about the West Indians, this I really did not want to not go addressed because it's the Thomas Sowell quote. By the way, Thomas Sowell, famous Maoist, who switched sides when he saw which way the wind was blowing. Yeah. He was a former Maoist.
He was a former Marxist. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Maoism is a type of Marxist. So what's happening here is that what you're forgetting is that recent immigrants are cherry picked by the immigration system. They explicitly let in the racist and the richest and most skilled West Indians, as opposed to the people who were just brought here as slaves. So obviously there's going to be a huge difference between those two communities with regard to, because again, the United States isn't letting in just anybody. It's not a random sample from the West Indies. It's the best of the best from the West Indies, as opposed to a population that just happens to be in the United States already as the direct result of slavery.
I mean, that would be true for certain cases, but not all of them, like the Chinese immigration, Irish immigration, Japanese immigration. I mean,
the Chinese, these communities were not enslaved. I mean, the Chinese were, kind of strong-armed into building say what?
Indentured servitude.
Yeah, indentured servitude is not slavery. And those that were brought here as indentured servants, like originally both white and black people were brought to the United States as indentured servants, but that was only on paper and they were effectively slaves. And we didn't even begin to see the creation of a racial hierarchy until there were joint white and black indentured slave revolts and runaways. Then that's when they started giving privileges to the white slaves and punishing them for fraternizing with the black slaves. slaves. You can read this in Howard Zinn's Drawing the Color Line. I think that's the 4th chapter of People's History of America. So like we've seen this from the very inception of the country. It has specifically targeted black people in about the worst possible way that you could, except for maybe the Native Americans, since, they
killed them all.
Killed all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree with that, but I'd say that the slavery wasn't the biggest contributing factor to the disparity today, because we see that like up until the 1960s, especially like the marriage rate and the 2-parent home rate for African Americans was 60 to 80%, significantly higher. So most of the contributing factor to the disparity today is like the war on drugs and the policies that were specifically put in place to discriminate against black people, which also were put into place, like opium laws against the Chinese people, the internment camps for Japanese people. Like, we see that in a lot of different
Certainly,
places.
but also keep in mind that the U.S. government ran specific propaganda campaigns aimed at convincing everyone after that Asian people were like the model minority. So like there have been specific like advertising campaigns that were made to uplift Asians that black people did not benefit from. Now, there's one other thing that I do really want to bring up here, because it seems like a lot of this argument here, for coming at you pretty hot at the beginning. Yeah. But like the case of Freddie Gray, for instance, this is something that we cannot untangle, like the legacy of, for instance, redlining from policing today. Freddie Gray was younger than me. And what wound up happening with him was he was raised in a red line tenement with lead paint in the walls. He grew up as a baby, like many babies do, eating lead paint. It literally damaged his brain and that of his sisters and a lot of other people that grew up in that same thing. And he won a case and was awarded a large sum of money. But unfortunately, because he was essentially mentally damaged, he was tricked out of that money by a corporation that tricked him into signing away the vast majority of it for a single lump sum. People poisoned by lead are more aggressive, less agreeable, and less able to rationally judge situations. And all of those factors came together that led to the Baltimore police grabbing him, throwing him in that van for the rough ride, and doing donuts in the parking lot until they severed his spine. Like you cannot disentangle the current situation of race and racist policing from its racist past. It like maybe in 500 years you could, if we stopped doing everything today, but not now. It's too soon, and it's affecting people directly in our time. It's affecting people who are younger than me and you. We just don't see it because it doesn't target us.
With that, are you guys okay with going into question and answer, both of you?
Sure.
All right. Is that okay with you, Brenton?
Yeah.
I'm okay, good. Cool. All right. So first off, we have something from Stephen Steen. He says, Brenton's openings are like James' abs, magnificent and well sculpted. Next one is from Gabriel K. He says, agnosticism is mental laziness. Some take a stand like TJ. Meanwhile, Twitter is exploding with boomer tweets.
Stephen Gray is an idiot. Atheism for the win. Stephen Gray is an atheist.
I would, the agnosticism is not some point between atheism and theism. Agnosticism is a position about your ability to know something. If you are an agnostic, you can be an atheist and an agnostic, which means you don't believe in gods and you don't believe it's possible to know anything about gods. And you can be a Christian and an agnostic and say, I believe in God, but I do not believe it's possible to know about it. Agnosticism, it's not like this little middle ground that people think it is, even though they do use it that way.
Gotcha. Next one is also from Gabriel K. He says, Brandon doesn't understand statistics. Oh no. Skeptics.
Brandon.
Who's this Brandon guy?
I don't know, but I'm mad at him.
Bad Brandon. Tioga says, is TJump insinuating with 1350 that there is an inherent racial component to violence, or might social factors be at play?
Absolutely, social factors are at play. I'm not in any way disputing the fact that the war on drugs is racist.
All right.
Thank Christ.
Next one is from Gabriel K. He says, bottom line, Brandon has an idea. Oh my gosh, Brendan and now Brandon.
It's all right. Everybody does that. Brandon, Brenton, Bradley.
Brandon has an agenda. TJ about facts.
What the hell does that mean?
I think like he's saying that your interpretation is just your idea and may not correspond to reality, and so until you can demonstrate your idea actually corresponds to reality, it doesn't really matter, and the facts win, something like that.
I mean, I guess he can say that, but I think I've fairly demonstrated that my idea corresponds to reality. Throughout this debate, I was the one who was grounding everything in actual real policy and real history and real events.
All right. Next one is from the Crawdaddy029. They say, did demonstrate it and it's still disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself and change your J to an R.
Hey, if that got me the presidency, I'd do it.
Yeah.
The next one,
TJump, I should preface this, by the way, because I did come at you hard. The fact was, like, I heard a number of arguments that I've heard from people who push this disingenuously, and I don't think you're disingenuous here. I do think you're very wrong. Well,
thank you.
Yeah, but like I think you at least come by it honestly.
all right. Next one is from Layman. He says, most academics are statists, therefore we can't trust them, is the anarchist version of the Jews are controlling academia at Brenton.
I mean,
I thought that was hilarious. I'm totally going to get a clip of that and like put it on my channel. That was great.
Yeah. I would prefer you not clip me out of context, or if you're going to do that, please put it in its proper context. The issue is not that we cannot trust them. It's that when we look at academics, like, we have to realize that everyone that we talk to is biased towards certain ideas. And if you say most academics say this great thing about the state, and I point out that the overall prevailing ideology is one that says the state is a great thing, one would expect that. In much the same way that if we had a society of bird worshipers, most academics would say, hey, this is great, we're worshiping birds. To a certain extent, it's the prevailing ideology. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong, and it's not a conspiracy theory. It's that we have to look at the actual data, not just the opinion of the academics.
Gotcha. Next one is from also the Crawdaddy029. He says, furthermore, I'm extremely disappointed with modern day to be for allowing this racism bull effery to have a platform. What the H are we thinking? Oh no. All right. Next one.
I'm mad about it too.
Next one is from Tioga. She says, you solve over-policing by social programs.
Sure.
I mean, yeah.
All right. And that's actually all for the questions. They went pretty quick this time, but thank you guys so much. If you guys have anything.
Brenton's analogy of the breasts and testicles. Men have breasts, so that doesn't actually work. The testicles ones work though.
I'm sorry. What?
Men have breasts, so the average number of breasts for every human is 2.
That depends on how you define breasts, but good point. I'm just going to say something here because I meant to bring this up earlier with regard to Black Lives Matter versus versus All Lives Matter. What's bothering me about this is that All Lives Matter didn't appear until Black Lives Matter appeared, and the fact of the matter is that the slogan, not in how TJump uses it necessarily, but how it tends to be used in parlance, is as a red herring. Someone says Black Lives Matter, when people say when people say All Lives Matter, what they're essentially doing is they're just saying shut up. Someone says Black Lives Matter, they just are distracting the conversation and trying to take it away from a critical conversation on race. And I think that's really wrong and very stupid.
Yeah, I'd say that most people, it's just like a childhood retort. We don't agree with you on this topic, and so this is a way to say we disagree. So that's it.
Yeah. And okay. I would agree with you on that. I'm glad that's in there. So we are in agreement at least about that.
We have one last little super chat that came in. Thank you, Sunday Worship. They say, thanks, Brandon, Tim, and Clarissa. Great job. So that's a nice, happy little note to end on.
All right, Brandon, Tim, and
Yeah, it was good to great, Brandon. Nice to debate you.
okay.
Oh man, all right. We'll keep on differentiating the reasonable from the unreasonable and have an absolutely wonderful Wednesday night.